So real quick before we start today's video, I'm giving away this classic Peruvian walnut wormwood deck box. This was sent to me and I opened it last week in a video, but I'm going to be giving it away to one of you guys. If you want details, check out the description where you can enter the giveaway. There are lots of ways to increase your chances to win. I'm going to be giving it away and it's lasting until the end of this month, so hurry up and enter. Alright, so the video today. How to beat big Yu-Gi-Oh! Boss monsters. They're a problem, no one likes them, but in this video I'm going to give you 5 ways that you can deal with them surprisingly easily. Let's get started. So right now we've got stuff like Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon and Cyber Dragon Infinity and just all these monsters that can really make a near unbreakable board of just powerful monsters, and certain stuff can't even be targeted or certain stuff, floats. So I've got some pretty decent ways of getting rid of these monsters. Some of these techniques work only on a few, some of them work on more or less all of them. It just kind of depends, but there should be something in here that everybody can relate to and use. So the first one is really easy. Kaijus. People don't like Kaijus a lot. I know a lot of people complain about, just the idea that a Kaiju can just swamp your field and just tribute away your big boss monster, tribute away whatever you worked hard for. And don't get me wrong, I don't like Kaijus all that much, but they're a really great way to get rid of like Crystal Wing and Cyber Dragon Infinity, and those really are kind of the real problem cards. Also like, Cyframe Lord Omega and just all those really annoying cards that can either run or protect themselves or something. So just being able to tribute off your opponent's monsters is super valuable. The cool thing about Kaijus is that when you tribute your opponent's monster, remember that that tributing happens as just a cost. So it doesn't start a chain. They cannot chain Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon to it. They cannot chain Omega's effect and run from it. They cannot use Cyber Dragon Infinity to negate it. Their monster is just already gone. It just gets tributed off. It's just like that. It's like how Lava Golem and similar cards worked in the past. The only important thing to keep in mind with Kaijus is that if your opponent does have Vanity's Emptiness on the field, you can't special summon the Kaijus, so you won't be able to do that, but yeah. And similar cards to Kaijus are things like Santa Claus and Lava Golem, or even like Raw Sphere Mode or something if you're feeling crazy. But yeah, those are really probably the easiest way to deal with most boss monsters. Not necessarily the only one, but it's definitely the one where your opponent can least resist it. So definitely, side deck some Kaijus or even main deck them if your deck can do that. Like Murmellus can, use the kind of main deck Gameciel or something. But yeah, Kaijus are a great way to deal with any problematic big monsters your opponent might have. Next card is Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. So this card is deceptive actually. The reason I say it is because, most people would think, oh, well, Valor and Maxi are the superior hand traps, but Ghost Ogre has I don't want to say niche, but a very specific use against these big boss monsters. After they negate something, you can use Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit to just outright destroy them. So, say that my opponent has Cyber Dragon Infinity on the field or something, and goes to just anything that negates stuff. We can use the example of like Crystal Wing or something too. Crystal Wing can negate monster effects, so I use some monster effect. They activate Crystal Wing's effect to negate it, and then I can use Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, and it destroys Crystal Wing. And Crystal Wing, only gets to negate once per turn, so it's just gone. Now, unfortunately, this does mean that you do have to bait out an activation of their effect first, which oftentimes means you're going to be losing, more cards in the exchange, but, sometimes it's worth it. Like, sometimes it's worth losing 2 cards if it means getting rid of Crystal Wing, because Crystal Wing is a tough customer. Like, it's hard to swing over it in battle, and it's very difficult to just, get rid of it in other ways. The one thing to keep in mind with Crystal Wing though is sometimes if they're playing it in a dragon deck like Blue Eyes, they might have Return of the Dragon Lords in the grave, so you need to be cognizant of that. But otherwise, it's a really great way of getting rid of, Cyber Dragon Infinity and all of those just similar cards like that. So definitely keep Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit in mind for your side or even main deck. If your main deck can use Psychic Tuners or level 3 or with maybe E-Tailor or something, it's also a really great choice. So yeah, keep it in mind. Next card is actually just Fiendish Chain. So this is an older card. It's kind of been, I know it's crept out, but it's definitely not as popular now. But it actually has a very distinct advantage over cards that would sometimes be seen as better, like Effect Veiler and Breakthrough skill, well, Fiendish Chain has the benefit of just kind of holding the monster in place. So it can work really similarly to Ghost Ogre in that, you know, if you can bait your opponent to activate their Crystal Wings effect or their Cyber Dragon Infinity's effect, you can just use it then. And it's cool because then you won't actually lose your cards. So if they've got Cyber Dragon Infinity out and, you know, I activate something and then, okay, I'm gonna negate it, I can just chain Fiendish Chain to their monster and it's now negated, so I still get to resolve whatever I was resolving first. And Fiendish Chain, even better, just kind of holds the monster in place. So even though it doesn't get rid of the monster, it does ensure that the monster can't do anything. So Cyber Dragon Infinity is just sort of stuck there, and if I'm correct, it loses its attack points as well. Also, you know, Crystal Wing is, and once Crystal Wing is like stuck by Fiendish Chain, it can't get the attack boost like from, you know, being attacked and things like that. So really, really valuable things to have, you know. Fiendish Chain won't get rid of the monster, but it will give you time to deal with the monster, and that's really important, just being able to take maybe an extra turn or two to mount some sort of offense and deal with the monster. So in that way, it's better than Breakthrough and Veiler because they only negate the effect, but you've still got this big beater, and you know, it will still just get its effect back next turn, whereas Fiendish kind of really silences it for a little bit of time. So now, don't get me wrong, you know, Twin Twisters and other things make it a slightly less viable option these days, but you know, don't fool yourself. Like, sometimes people will sort of take the double initiative and be like, oh, well, people aren't playing traps because they're afraid of Twin Twisters, so I just won't play Twin Twisters, so maybe it's actually worth it to play a few more traps than normal. But yeah, definitely keep Fiendish Chain in mind. Next one's number S39, Utopia the Lightning. So a lot of people don't really like this card either. It's like, kind of like Kaijus, it's kind of a love-hate relationship. But the fact of the matter is, this card gets work done. It's actually, you know, more prominently known as a good way of dealing with like Burning Abyss and like Cosmos. You know, like you can attack Dark Destroyer with this thing and boost to 5,000 and deal lots of damage, and it can't activate its effect in the graveyard. So it's really great for dealing with that, but it can also do a pretty good job of dealing with certain other boss threats. It's not as flexible necessarily, but the good thing is that it can deal with any big monster and anything that floats. And as we know, a lot of boss monsters these days really can like float when they die. It's an annoying concept, but you know, everything, it dies and it searches or draws or gets something back, and that's just a real problem. So using S39 is a good way to swing over anything and ensure that you don't really meet any resistance, because when S39 attacks, your opponent can't use anything until like the end of the damage step. So you know, they're just sort of left helpless, and you can actually like game your opponent pretty easily with it. Now, some would even say that Utopia the Lightning is a boss monster, but I wouldn't say it's quite that bad. I mean, it's a little bit easier to deal with. You can just kind of use basic removal on it. Which brings me to the last card, or sort of cards, on this, and that's Raigeki and Dark Hole. So, a lot of people will say like Raigeki and Dark Hole have been crept out and they're just not relevant anymore, or just barely. But the truth is, you know, Raigeki and Dark Hole are actually, for dealing with boss monsters, somewhat playable. Much like with Ghost Ogre, much like with Fiendish Chain, if you can just bait out these monsters' negations like once, then you can just Dark Hole or Raigeki them away, and it's actually really great for dealing with a fairly large established board, because oftentimes these boards aren't nearly as like tightly secured as, you know, you might think. Like I said, two of the big monsters on this list are Infinity and Crystal Wing, and I've seen boards that have like Infinity, Crystal Wing, and say like a Blue Eyes or something, you know, on the field. And believe it or not, the only monster in that field that can actually negate anything is like Cyber Dragon Infinity. You bait that one negation and then your Dark Hole or your Raigeki will just clear the rest of the board. Now, like I said with Ghost Ogre and stuff, you do need to be careful of Return of the Dragon Lords. It can save them, so this isn't always a great alternative against, say, Blue Eyes, but it can be really good against any other deck that puts out those boss monsters fast and in a hurry. And yeah, and also just on a side note, Dark Hole and against Burning Abyss, Dark Hole and Raigeki are better than you might think depending on the deck that you're using, because remember that Burning Abyss monsters can only activate their effects once per turn, and with like, you know, only one like Seer and only one Graph, if you can just sort of like get a negation off and then put a lot of damage on the board, you can actually sometimes beat them and actually sort of stop their floating for a turn. And also, these cards get supplemented by stuff like Abyss Dweller, so if you use Abyss Dweller and then Raigeki, a Field of Cosmos, or Burning Abyss, they'll be very angry with you because their graveyard effects will be negated, so that's also another great way to utilize these cards. So those are 5 really cool sort of ways to deal with boss monsters that are pretty easy. They don't take necessarily a whole lot of effort. You might not like them. I know people don't really enjoy Kaijus, but they do work, and boss monsters, especially like kind of unbreakable board style boss monsters, are beginning to be an increasing, prominent threat in the game. So having some sort of way to deal with them is definitely worth looking into. In the comments, leave your suggestions. How do you deal with big boss monsters? What is your best method, in this world of negation and floating and maybe untargetable stuff, How do you deal with it? I'd like to know, because, we're only going to need more advice going forward. So that's going to be it. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. I know I haven't posted in about a week, just long story, crazy life things, but I'm back, so it should be great, it should be fun. Check out my sponsor, TCGplayer. Got theme duels coming up now that Dark Magician finally gets that one good support card this Friday. I'm really excited about that. So we're gonna have a Dark Magician Blue Eyes rematch, and like Red Eyes is gonna be somewhere in the mix. It's gonna be great. Also remember, if you want to win this deck box from Wormwood, classic Peruvian walnut, I'm giving it away until the end of this month. Description for details. And subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'll catch you guys in the next one.